Thank you for having me, and thank you to the folks at EDRLab for putting together this wonderful event, and what a wonderful opportunity to come from far away, Seattle, Washington, here to Bordeaux. My first time here, beautiful city. And today I'll be talking about mobility, but I'd first like to start out with a little introduction about myself and my company to give a little context for my comments today. I have a small company in Seattle, Washington called Blufire Productions. We have historically provided consulting services to the software industry around multimedia and digital media products. And about 10 years ago, we began focusing exclusively on ebooks. And in the last 10 years, our focus has been helping companies of all kinds and organizations deploy ebook readers and ebook distribution platforms. We currently work with over 100 organizations in 34 countries, a few in France as well, in deploying applications, primarily mobile reading applications, but also server-side software and distribution technologies. We are also a member of the Readium Foundation, and in fact we, as well as being involved with idpf and W3C, having now worked with the Readium projects now for about 3 years, so we were a founding member of the organization along with the idpf and a handful of others, and we've been very actively contributing over the last 3 years. I also serve on the board of directors of the Readium Foundation. And speaking of Readium, I have a nice announcement, a little nice news to share, and that is that after 3 years of work, we are now preparing to next month release our very first commercial application built on the Readium SDK. That application is called Cloud Shelf Reader, and that will first come out next month on the iOS App Store. It will be a free e-reader application. You're looking at it here on the screen. It is, because it supports, uses Readium SDK, we're able to provide a very robust support for the ePUB 3 format with video, audio, synchronized audio and highlighting, media overlays, MathML, interactivity, and all the wonderful things, including accessibility about ePUB 3. And we're very excited about that. And that's coming very soon. And a few of you out there have private beta versions of the application. FYI, we released a new version this morning, so if you haven't looked, there's a nice new version for you, and we'll be going public with that here in the next month. And I'll give a little quick short demo before I move into my actual talk, just to get a sense of what Readium can do in a mobile application. And if you are interested in developing applications based on Readium, happy to demo it for you in person if you want to get together at some point this week, and I'd happy to talk about our experiences in developing using Readium. And so as an example of Readium SDK, this is a fixed layout ePUB, and we can go in and this one particular has read aloud, and you won't be able to hear it.
Ladybug Girl makes friends everywhere she goes.
And it will highlight as it goes.
Hi, she says.
And one of the things that I'm excited about with this particular application is that we've done all of the things that, by using Readium, we have all the content rendering capabilities that ePUB 3 offers, the Readium SDK offers. One of the things that's kind of unique that we are doing with this particular app, we've added the normal features like highlighting annotations, synthetic page numbering, search, definition lookup, and all that kind of thing. But we one of the things that's kind of fun that we've been working on recently is a feature called Notebook, which takes all of your annotations from all your books, puts them in one place. They can be tagged, organized, searched, filtered, so that for researchers, for example, a very useful tool for being able to collect all your annotations, highlights from books in one particular place, and then jump right in to the book and continue reading. And so that's something I'm pretty excited about. So today I'm gonna go into Cloud Shelf, and we'll get started on the actual talk for today. And I'm talking about mobility. And so I will open my slide deck. And mobility and ebooks, for ebooks is really a core topic because at the end of the day, so much of our consumption of what we think of as ebooks is on mobile devices. And mobility is changing the way that we interact with content as a whole in a dramatic way. And as we know, we can go to a bus stop or a train station where people will stop and they'll immediately pull out that phone and everyone's looking at their smart device. And the proliferation of mobile devices has really unprecedented in history in terms of the adoption of a technology at scale, worldwide. And it's really transforming the publishing industry, but it's transforming many, many industries. I mean, mobile is eating the world. And so there's a lot to talk about, but I'm going to try to focus on specific things that we've seen from our experience in working with our customers in helping them deploy mobile applications, that when we look at mobility and we think about ePUB, which is really very much about creating content that is optimized for mobile, sometimes there's things about mobility that we tend to forget, and those are the things I wanted to focus on, particularly today as I'm talking about the topic. And the first thing that I want to dive into is talking about adaptive layout. And as we know, and has been mentioned, if you take a multi-page PDF document and you try to read it on this, you will have an unsatisfactory experience. It's just too small, and you're panning around the page, and you're not going to enjoy it. You're certainly not going to want to do it, but sometimes you have to. And it's good that we can. But what ePUB, of course, does, and as we all know, as a key feature is adaptive layout. And that manifests itself primarily as reflow. So as we go into a document, and we're all familiar with this, but just to take a quick look, if I go into, actually this is a better example here. So reflow, of course, means that the content will fill each page, and I can go in and I can change the font size, and it will reflow across pages, and I will be able to read the documents. And that's an important feature of ePUB, and critical for mobility and for mobile consumption. But one thing that we often forget in the industry is that adaptive layout, or optimizing content for mobile devices, is not just about reflow. Reflow is one component of a mobile experience and mobile design, and that ePUB actually has quite a few features that allow us to really optimize content for this size of screen, this size of screen, that size of screen. And it's not just about the text, it's about layout, it's about how you manage images, it's about how you manage tables. And the reality of adaptive layout is that it is a new art form that really has not been explored or developed prior to this decade. And it has a long ways to go. We don't really have educational programs. We don't have masters in fine arts and adaptive layout, but we need that, because this is something that is going to be the future of content on our screens. And if we want that experience to be good, if we want that experience to be beautiful, if we want that experience to be useful, there is a great art to it, and there's great skill to it. And the reality is that taking content and putting it into EPUB format is no more a guarantee that you have a good book and a high quality book and a good experience than just taking text, printing it on paper, and binding it in a book. As we know, it takes a great amount of skill, and it has, in the case of books, has evolved over centuries of how we lay out content in books. And adaptive layout is something it may take us long, I hope not, but it's going to take decades for us to fully begin to learn how to create adaptive layout for mobile devices. And I think that it's really important in the publishing industry not to forget that fact. It's very easy to say, okay, we took our book and we put it in EPUB, we're done. Well, file conversion is only the beginning. And laying out content for mobile, again, is an art, it is a skill, and it's a profession. And it's sad, there was an event last week in the US, or actually in Canada, for people who are experts in these kinds of things, and many of them are looking for jobs. Because a lot of the times the publishing industry will offshore to countries where they'll find the cheapest conversion they can possibly find. Well, I highly recommend that the publishing companies that are here today consider hiring some of those people who are these experts, because they are very much needed in this industry. The second thing I'd like to talk about is offline reading, and we know that ePUB is a packaged format, and so it allows us to take a bunch of content, a bunch of chapters, package it together, and it has all the constructs that allow us to read that offline. And we often think about offline reading as it's a capability or it's a requirement, and people would expect that we want to be able to read offline, but we sometimes forget how unique the capability of offline reading in ebooks is when you think about other experiences on mobile. And there's also opportunities there to consider. So when we look at offline reading, and if you think about how we use devices, we get almost addicted to these things. And we will be looking at Facebook and Twitter and all of these things, but they're all based on online access. Ebooks are one of the few things where we can actually have that ongoing consumption experience that we now tend to crave all the time, offline, when we're not connected, when we're on a bus, when we're on a train, we're in the cabin in the woods, or we're sitting by the pool in Acapulco. And that is a fairly unique capability that these other consumption types of content don't have. And it's a real opportunity for us in the digital publishing industry to think about how that advantage to us is something that we want to both promote and to take advantage of. And it's kind of interesting because oftentimes when you think about the fact that people are, when they're offline, oftentimes they're looking for something to consume. And if we think about what are those times that people are offline, what are they doing? And there's some commonalities to travel and other things that we can think about taking advantage of that offline experience as a way to take advantage of the fact that we have a unique capability in ebooks to provide a very compelling offline experience. Next thing I'd like to talk about is the fact that mobile is that mobile tends to be experiential in focus, meaning instead of looking at mobile and ebooks as a product that you deliver, really the fact is that it is an experience on mobile, and it lives within a framework of other experiences. Meaning, a book is a very standalone piece of a product that has its own unique attributes. But on mobile, we have all kinds of experiences, whether they be games, whether they become social media, and we have expectations that developed around that, and we have around those experiences, and we have paradigms, and we have habits, and we have commonalities across these different media types. So if we think about the mobile content experience, it really gives us insights as we think about what is it that we want to do with digital content on mobile devices, because it's not just about delivering a book in some standalone world. We live within a ecosystem now that has its own expectations, that it has its own patterns, that it has its own interactivity across different content, and we want to think about how we deliver content that is crafted to take advantage of that and crafted to meet those expectations. And there's a component of that, of course, which is that in the world of mobile, we as consumers don't really interact with files all that much. We interact with metadata. And this seems quite obvious at one level, but actually it's rather important for the ebook industry to think about, because it is, for example, when we access, whether it's movies or music or books or magazines, as consumers, we almost never see that file name. We never see a file. We don't see a file extension. We don't even know what file format it is. You know, how many millions of ebook users out there in the world have even heard of ePUB? A lot of them have not. And so it's important to realize that this thing that we're delivering to end consumers is not really, I mean, it is a file, but they don't think of it as a file. They think of it as an experience that they access, and that they do so through interfaces that are about metadata. And so it means that metadata is important, but it also means that how we deliver content has to take this fact into consideration. And one of the reasons I wanted to mention that is, as we work with retailers and libraries and publishers, one of the things that we often see with publishers is this desire and this kind of inclination to want to create a product and deliver it as a file. Because it's easy, and because creating that end-to-end solution of actually presenting content as metadata means an ecosystem approach that is not easy to do. And so it's easy to want to say, oh, I'm just going to deliver a file. But the reality is that is not how consumers interact with content on mobile devices, and therefore it's probably not the best idea. And this really gets back to the fact that on mobile devices, our experience with that content and with the things that we interact with on mobile happens almost, not exclusively through apps, but vast majority of apps. And even when you have internet-connected content that you're dealing with, most of the time it's not in a browser. The statistics show now the majority of times that people are connecting with the internet is not through a web browser. Well, it kind of is, but it's essentially web browser technologies embedded in most of our applications, embedded in Facebook, embedded in Twitter, embedded in reader apps, in Kindle, et cetera. And so as we think about the fact that this content is being delivered to users in apps, we have to think about the fact that there's two things. There's part of that experiential component that comes around our expectations around apps, but there's another component of that is that if we are crafting a product that lives in an environment, that environment has multiple layers. That environment has a device layer, it has an operating system layer, and it has an app layer. And that content that's being delivered to mobile devices in an app is content that has expectations and that lives side by side with other content. And it doesn't have the standaloneness of a book. It lives within this environment. If we're going to craft content to be consumed in the environment that it's consumed in, we have to think about apps. And one of the things that's interesting is that oftentimes in the publishing world and in the digital book world, we either think of an app when it's content as a standalone piece of content as a title, or we think about these very generic reading applications and content that goes into them. And there's a whole world out there, and this is really exciting about the EPUB format, there's a whole world out there where you could create unique combinations. As an example, if I'm creating cookbooks in the EPUB format, yes, I could read those in a standard EPUB reader, but could I have an app that would make the experience of reading cookbooks and using cookbooks all that much better, all that much more valuable, all that much more compelling, and that is yet more of a competitive experience to the other things that we do on mobile apps? We certainly could. We could do the same thing with travel and many, many other things. And so I think as a publishing industry, because the publishers have looked at the retail channel and say, well, the retail channel is really in charge of the applications. I'm going to seed that direct content with the consumer. I'm going to seed that experience to some third party. But then when they do want to, when publishers often want to do content in apps, they'll say, well, I'm just going to make one app, and it's going to be one title. And there's this whole world in between where you can have apps. And that's one of the things that I'm so excited about for Readium, and that Readium is going to provide the frameworks and the technologies that will enable many people to create reading applications that can be either generic or can be very targeted and very focused to certain kinds of content, certain kinds of use cases. And that ability of Readium to provide tools where, we've spent 3 years now creating Readium and 1.5 years creating this application that we're looking at. And that's expensive and it's time consuming, and we need to make that shorter. We need to make it easier for people to innovate and do a lot of interesting things and really unlock the potential that mobile provides in a world where almost everyone's going to have a mobile device with them. And the fact that right now that anyone in this room could pull the device out of their pocket, go to a multitude of different places, access catalogs of millions of books, and immediately download them and begin reading them is a really amazing thing. And ePUB and the Readium Foundation, I think, are very critical components of making an environment where we can really unlock the potential of that. So thank you.
Maybe you've got some questions. We've got some time to take a question if you like. I want to say thank you. It was very interesting because you placed all the landscape about, well, the adaptive layout. That means using it everywhere in every format, multimedia experience, offline experience, correlation between the offline and the online, to enhance the experience. So we think really that this type of format, ePUB, plus this type of mobile application can be an enabler for new experiences. So is there somebody in the room who has some question to Micah before we move on?
Did you have a question?
I
Yes.
might have a small question. You said about the metadata, which is important, and we from the Dutch libraries we experience very much that there's a lot of confusion about what in a file can be used on what device. And like on an e-reader, and it's now we are working with an Android app for an e-reader to see that also the experience is that half of our users from the 300,000 users, 300,000 users we have, is still using an e-ink reader. And to get the right experience for those users is also needed that you have in the metadata what kind of experience you can expect, what can work and what cannot work. Is there already being worked on the metadata user-friendly way for explaining the end user the differences, what you...
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the core question.
The core question is, you said, rightly so, the end user does not know what is the file format, or
Yes.
things like that. Now we see that there sometimes are certain elements in the ePUB which can be used on one platform and not on another platform. It becomes more and more difficult to explain beforehand, before somebody lends a book or buys a book, what he can expect. So is there some standardization in the metadata that we can better announce?
Yeah, that's a good point. That is a good point. I'll repeat the question, and I think it's an excellent one, by the way, which is that in a world of e-ink devices and different capabilities across devices, that in the case of ePUB 3, you have the ability to provide content experiences that may be supported on some devices and not on others. And that this becomes a challenge in communicating to users and consumers as to what they should expect. And I completely agree, and I think there's a similar problem with fixed layout and reflowable. And I think it does, and the specific question was there metadata that can deal with that. And I would assume that, I mean, that's probably not the right, I'm not the right person to talk about metadata. Certainly, ePUB is rather flexible in the kinds of metadata that can be stored in an ePUB. And so you could, in fact, include that kind of information. But what I don't believe we really have as an industry is a semantic standard to really express that in a way that's standardized and that can be used in communication. And I think that is something that is very much lacking in our industry, because it is an issue, because people, like I was saying, people don't know what an EPUB is. And even if they did, you have these issues of, well, it's fixed layout EPUB and it's not. And then, oh, well, there's EPUB is backwards compatible. So if you have an EPUB 2 rendering system, you can still see a certain amount of the content. You can see the text and images, but not necessarily the videos. And how do you appropriately set user expectations? And I think that a lot of that comes down to the distribution platforms. And so if you look at, and I don't think they've done it great yet, but if you look at how, for example, iBooks and Amazon and Kindle have tried to do some of that, they'll tend to refer to fixed layout ebooks as illustrated books, and they'll talk about enhanced books and other kinds of things. And I think we don't really have a language that's standard to express those things. But I think that at the end of the day, where that's going to originate is with the people who are doing the direct distribution, because they'll have that problem that you're describing. They'll come up with the language to express that. There will be different ways of doing that, and over time that will become standardized or become commonized. But I think it's an excellent conversation around, in particular, metadata. We see this a lot in the distribution platforms where and you see this a lot with, in the retail world, you have many cases where a retailer is getting content from many different distributors. They get the metadata from each of these distributors as to the catalog that's available to them to sell. They sell the content to the user, but the retailer, ingest the files themselves. The distributor holds the files, oftentimes due to DRM reasons, and they deliver that directly to the end consumer once the sale is made. So the retailer knows very little about that content. And so it is absolutely, we see this all the time, where we have customers that will have to struggle with this question of, they can deliver content to their users that their users can't even use in their own apps. And this becomes a real challenge, and there needs to be semantic metadata. Probably, I mean, in ePUB 3 perhaps, but more so perhaps in Onyx and other ways of expressing these kinds of capabilities are necessary. So I would agree, but unfortunately, no, that doesn't exist yet, but it does need to.
Thank you very much, Micah.
Thank you.